All right, welcome back. Welcome back. We're winding down here, getting to our last couple of sessions. And hopefully, for those of you that have been to one of our former Central Region seminars before, you know us, we folks in the Central, we like to usually have a lot of networking. We like to and chit chat, and that usually involves food and drink. Well, we can't really do that in a virtual setting other than hopefully you got your coffee, your water, your tea, and your snacks there. So this next session is kind of what we call a coffee or a brunch with your specialist. So we're going to pretend that we are sitting there at the table dining with you all, and we're going to engage in some wonderful, great conversation, hopefully. So how are we going to engage in that conversation on this Zoom app? Well, those of you that have switched, hopefully you're in the Zoom platform. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be, well, the way my screen's set up, there's a little button that says more with 3 dots above it. If I click on that button, there's a raise hand symbol. So that's how you're going to raise your hand, and our wonderful AFTO producer, Randy, in the background is going to unmute you so you can talk and chat with us. So that's how we're going to play this session. If you are not in the Zoom application, actually, you can actually chat through the chat box in Passable, and we'll try to read your comments off as quick as possible. So without further ado, I would like to introduce a very popular retail specialist that we have in the Central Region. Everybody knows Greg Abel. Greg is going to be facilitating or leading this session for us, with all of us jumping in as needed. He is, like I say, retail food specialist with FDA Office of State Cooperative Programs. So Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us bantering and chatting here.
All right, Kenya, thanks a lot. So this is going to be brand new. We've never done this before, so we don't even know how it's going to go. So I did a little bit of this at National NEHA in June, and it went really well. So we're hoping to carry it over to the Central Region. And we know, like Kenya said, how important Central Region likes to network. So this session is designed to do just that. It's a session of bantering and networking, kind of like with your cohorts from different states, and you're standing around the coffee urn, you know, with some fresh baked muffins and fruit cut into chunks. Or for those that like happy hour, you know, your free drink ticket and a bowl of pub mix in a round little bowl. So anybody can chat it up. We have 2 ways to do it: through Zoom, raise your hand, you'll be unmiked, and through Pathloor, we'll try to screen those chat things as well. Ours are in this chat box. We can talk about anything: wild game versus domestic game in your states, the 3 silver linings that resulted from COVID that changed the positive flow in your work environment, the price of lumber, Mike, whatever you guys want. You know, one thing I did learn over COVID is the diversity of food delivery variations that are happening around us. And one of them that I never even knew of before kind of hit home in a question. And it came here home in Minnesota, in the county I live in. And a county inspector went out to do an inspection. Restaurants weren't at their peak capacity, as we all know, due to numbers, limitations, closures, et cetera, et cetera. So retailers are finding new ways to generate business, and got this question. This inspector realized inside the kitchen that this now fast food types restaurant now has a cryovac machine and bags. And what is going on? And learned that this restaurant became part of a food bookie system, for lack of a better term. That's not an official term, but it's like a food broker out of New York City called Food Belly. And so you can join this organization called Food Belly, and it's a mail order market. And you can click on there, go to any state, any restaurant, and you can order directly a food or a meal from that restaurant. And then it's up to the restaurant to deliver that meal to the ultimate consumer. So this particular restaurant, Minneapolis area, was sending food all over the country through their cryovac system. And then it brought up a lot of questions. Well, you know, do they need to be registered with FDA? What about seafood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So What are some of the other things out there in the central region you guys have been seeing that's been kind of unique or novel?
Looks like we had somebody tried to raise their hand. Joanna, I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself.
There she is.
There we go.
Just unmuted you, Joanna.
Yay.
Yeah, you can unmute your Zoom if you'd like to talk. There you go.
Hello, how are y'all
Hey.
doing?
Good.
Great. Good to hear from you.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to start this conversation off. I work in supply chain, and I've been in manufacturing, retail, and now I am in supply chain, and whenever y'all go out to do retail food inspections, what type of emphasis do y'all put on how they receive their product? Thanks.
You mean like from receiving from their supplier?
Yes.
Are you talking brick and mortar type of establishments? Or are you talking about consumers? Like,
I'm talking about the operators.
well, I guess, that's an expectation that if it's something that needs to be temperature controlled, it comes in at the right temperature. Generally, for some inspectors, there's a big inspector field out there of over, I don't know how many there are, there's 3,000 local and state, but how many employees that generates, I'm not sure. But, part of their inspectional overview is to catch receiving and to find out when receiving's in. They look at, in some cases, the truck and how those products are stored in the truck. Is there a risk of cross-contamination? Sometimes you see that. And then, of course, there's the drop-off box situation where no one's at the establishment, but there's an agreement between the establishment and the operator. They have a key or some kind of drop mechanism to drop it off and put it in the cooler. Did that answer your question? Or
Yes, sir. I just wanted more information to see what type of emphasis that the retail food specialists put into being there when the product is being received.
yeah, another thing I just thought of too, as you were talking, re-summarizing your question, is like if there's a temporary event or a large catered event, and there is food being prepared and going to be delivered, absolutely in those situations, that food then is met at receiving. There's more emphasis placed on something like that, if that makes sense. If the restaurant's going to be delivering something to a large festival, then that's an important part of the food flow to make sure that food is reached its destination safely and what kind of condition. So there's more emphasis there.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for joining our conversation. Let's see, looks like Justin's next with hand raised. Justin, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Oh, Greg, I miss you, brother. I'm a former regulatory guy back into the private sector. I work for a company that is a community-supported fishery. So we do no wholesaling, but we also don't have a storefront. So all of our product is shipped either home delivery like a Schwann's or via UPS. So my question comes to the labeling aspect. When we get inspected by our local inspector, are they going to be looking at our labels as like we are displaying it for sale? With the declaration of responsibility and net weights, etc. Or is it more like a deli where you go to the counter, you say, hey, I want a pound of that ham sliced, and then it's wrapped for convenience, right? Where the labeling, really, there's a lack of requirement.
Yeah, I guess I'll have the other specialists join in, and even some of our cohort across the country that run across the same thing. Then it's not an uncommon question, but if that fish is actually in a package, it has to be labeled. So if your retail outlet uses like Schwann's, then I would expect it to be packaged. But if it's something like a market setup where it's fresh fish on ice and the consumer says, I want that salmon, or I want this, whatever it is, then, then it's kind of like that deli situation.
So
you're looking at a
with-
approved source too.
with us being a CSF or, like a CSA, what happens is like the consumer will say, I want to subscribe. They have a 9-month membership. So, they're buying product that's still swimming in the ocean up in Alaska right now. So therefore, they've already bought it. They don't have a label to look at prior to buying it. So, they buy a 4.5 pound box and they don't even know what's going to be in that box for October. It could be coho salmon, it could be Pacific cod. And so, does that 4.5 pound box need a label? Does each individual fish portion need a label? Does it need to be weighed? Those are the types of questions that I'm trying to postulate in my head, given that wonderful guidance you and Mr. Powell gave me once upon a time. As to, the purpose of a label is so that the consumer has knowledge prior to purchasing it at a storefront, so they can pick that container up off the shelf, say, oh, okay, it has this many calories, contains these allergens. But with e-commerce, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, does anybody from other state jurisdictions have anything to add to Justin's? When you guys are out in the field, what are you looking for?
Any takers? Let's see, I'm checking the chat, see if we got anything going.
Justin, I would think that, kind of trying to wrap my head around it now that I heard CSA type thing. It's like a box of vegetables. So what about growing your fish? We just heard a session on, I was kidding, or a session on cell culture.
Because, when a regulator comes into our warehouse, you're not inspecting us as a processor, because we're not selling to somebody that's going to, resell it or bake it into a meal. We are literally shipping it right to our customer, like home delivery grocery store. So the way I've been able to view it, and I've talked to some of the manufactured FDA guys, just because seafood HACCP comes into play up in Sitka when we, process it and ship it down to our sister plant. What kind of, when we have a further processor making our product into smoked fish, obviously our labels contain ingredients. Our HACCP plan that we have, whether it's voluntary or not, because we're still in that gray area. Are we seafood HACCP? Are we retail? Where do we fall? Our HACCP plan says keep frozen until use, thaw into refrigeration. Like, we have that on our label, but when it comes to 21 CFR 101, the whole labeling, do we need net weights? Do we need all of this?
Yeah, I think North Dakota, Mike, we dealt with something like this in the past. Mike Lee, do you have anything to add on that? What are you guys looking at in North Dakota? He would have to raise his hand to get recognized. Well, if nothing else, Justin, you can email me the question. I'll try to research it a little bit more for you.
Okay, I can do that. I appreciate it, Greg. And I did sign up for that webinar for e-commerce foods. It's in I think 3 weeks or in October or something. So
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Well, yeah, where are you located out of?
Our main office is in Madison. We do all of our packaging in Illinois and processing up in Sitka.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, and Greg, from the passable chat, looks like couple regulators said that they look at compliance with federal regulations and labeling laws. And then we did get a couple questions or people asking if this would be covered in the e-commerce, the business summit. That's a good question. Hopefully it will be, but if you guys don't know how to register for that, please register for that. And you can also submit questions that you want to be addressed at that summit as well. So if we've got questions related to this that don't get answered today, we can definitely, hopefully they'll get addressed during the October meeting. So anybody else want to raise their hand and jump in? I'm trying to think what we got.
I'd like to hear a positive silver lining out of COVID that someone experienced over this last 1.5 years. I realized that I lost a lot of, I can't, this 1.5 years, everything blended together and I cannot recall things I've said or not said, I don't know if I'm just, my mind's too full or if I'm busy in my mind.
Looks like we got Michael Lee wanting to comment. Well, Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Greg, one positive that I noticed is when we did get back in the field, once COVID had settled down last fall, hand washing seemed to have improved. The only problem I'm noticing now is that people have short memories and hand washing is now worse, or, you know, at least back to the level it was at before COVID. So, but a silver lining was during COVID, I've never seen so many people wash their hands in the kitchen.
Yes, and that was a common trend. Hand washing was boosted, and use of sanitizer and new sanitizing labeling, you know, for kills COVID. And you're right. I'm talking to inspectors across my region. It's like those behaviors are falling back to what we normally saw, and even reporting illnesses, hearing of people going to work on purpose, having even COVID type symptoms, right? So.
Yeah, it's like Julie, you want to jump in and unmute yourself and comment?
I'm just seeing a greater appreciation for the work that we do. A lot of operators just really appreciative of all the work that we did during COVID.
Yeah, good one, Julie. Kim has her hand up. Kim Carlton.
Yeah, I think this is both a silver lining and also a crazy anomaly. And I think somebody mentioned this morning already, but the number of foodborne outbreaks that we had went way, way down. And at least here in Minnesota, we were still doing surveillance and our complaint line was still open. And I mean, our epidemiologists were definitely doing COVID work. So it's not like they weren't doing foodborne, but they were also keeping an eye on the foodborne world, and we just didn't have the outbreaks, which was really wild. And I was wondering if that's something that other people experienced. Thankfully, we didn't have any because we didn't have any staff to respond.
Any other states saw their foodborne illness numbers drop during the peak of COVID?
Yeah, I see in the comment, Greg, one of my states, Perry with Virginia, she posted that they had fewer illnesses were reported. Unfortunately, now she says, though, they're kind of back to normal. It's unfortunate to hear.
Yeah, I think I heard the same with Minnesota a few weeks ago. It started to increase.
It's like we got James with a comment. Hand raised. James, can you unmute yourself and speak?
Yeah, good afternoon. Greg, I got a lot of comments for you on positives. I would echo the comment also on the foodborne illness outbreaks were relatively silent over COVID. They are starting to pick up a little bit now. But from a positive note from COVID, look at all the opportunities people have had to attend training. Conferences and workshops, explosive, probably more attendance at meetings than ever has happened before, and all due to us being forced to really explore virtual technology. And I think that's a good thing because it gives even all of the people that are in the field that may not necessarily get opportunities to go to these national conferences to actually get involved and find out what's happening on a national level. And I think that's just good for our profession as a whole. Another thing is we all learned how to do our work differently. And we learned how to do virtual inspections and we learned to expand our horizons. And another kind of a side benefit is a lot more people have had the opportunity now to work part-time or full-time out of their homes. So there's been a lot of pluses to COVID where we've been able to show to employers that, hey, we can be just as efficient and effective at home as we can be in a cubicle. And COVID gave us the opportunity to show how that could be done.
Those are good positives. Especially the training. I mean, I've even been able to attend some trainings where I would not normally have considered, And man, OTAD is sure pumping out trainings left and right. How, let me ask you this, you guys being participants, how effective, to go to Jim's point, more trainings, how effective is virtual training been compared to classroom? I know in person there's a different dynamic that happens, but I mean, are you picking things up, or how do you feel? I mean, the quality is probably there, but how's the retention of that training?
Any takers?
No
And
takers.
if your name's on the screen, you can unmute yourself. Like I see Shelly and Michael Lee. I don't know if you guys are.
There's a lot of comments in the chat coming in, more travel can be taken. There's no travel budget. Access and quality are great. Attention span and competing computer things are a challenge. Absolutely. Hard not to multitask. Yeah, I think that's something we've seen, is that it's a little harder to focus when you have your email popping up and you're in a class, but you also are still at your workstation and your boss might be asking you to do something. So
I was able to prepare chicken Alfredo and buttered corn and do the dishes during this morning's meetings while I listened, but I feel like I still was able to retain the information. Kids have early dismissal today, so they were home for lunch early. So I was trying to balance all that at the same time while doing the conference. I wanted to mention too, one other positive I noticed is people in the establishments had a lot of time to install new kitchen floors, remodel their bathrooms, and bring some of those GRP structural things up to code. I don't think I've ever gone into more rural bars that had more. They were all very proud to show me their new bathrooms. So it was that was a positive as well.
Yeah, in North Dakota bars, some of them really need new floors. Having worked there.
We haven't approved plywood yet as a flooring option, but you do see it.
I think that instructing the virtual courses is much more difficult than in person. Doing a lot of the FT courses this year as an instructor, I think a lot more effort goes into doing it virtually.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. My name is Bria, and I'm actually new with public health. I received my graduate degree last year, and I'm currently working with the city of Elgin in Illinois. And I believe one of the benefits of the webinars or the virtual seminars and meetings is that you guys are recording them. So people like me who would like to go back, or who would like to stop the recording and do my own notes to prepare for licensing next year is a big benefit for me. So thank you very much.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you for the comment.
I agree. This is Mike Lee again. I agree with Mike too. When he said teaching the courses virtually is more difficult. My entire staff attended the risk-based methods approach to inspection course. And I've done it before live, and it certainly has advantages being taught in person, being able to interact with the instructors, especially when we go station to station doing the mock exercises and things. Now the course was very well done, I will say that, but I do think both from an instructor and a participant level, being in person obviously is the better way to go.
Yeah, I think that there's a great benefit to just having the availability too. It's so awesome having this widespread availability of training. Again, great that it can be recorded. It takes a lot of getting used to that virtual environment for the instructors, for the participants, but and maybe COVID isn't the best time to get used to those things. But by far, I'm glad it's there. I hope it stays. I don't hope it completely replaces in person. But looking just at budget, I can only go to so many in-person trainings a year, even if they're free. But I could possibly do more virtual.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Brian. I when you made the comment about instructors and attending, I'm one of those. If you can't tell, I feed off the audience. And it was so hard at first when we're doing all this virtual training. Like, I can't see these people. And so, seeing you guys on screen is helps a little bit, but I miss face-to-face, although we do get a lot done with virtual. So very good point.
Yes, someone made a suggestion about like to see a standardization training course virtually. I wonder how that would work.
That's a good one.
I do know, like Minnesota Health, and they run this thing called Regulators Breakfast. And the disappointing thing about that, there really is no breakfast now that we're virtual. But besides that, that was a joke, Kim. Besides that, they have their FDA standards go out and broadcast to all the local jurisdictions on interpretational scenarios or issues. And that, kind of is a way to help harmonize or do a little bit of standardization training. Probably not what this person was referring to, how to standardize virtually. But.
And Melissa, I see your hand up there. You got a comment?
Yeah, good morning, afternoon, wherever you're at. I would agree with what a lot of speakers said. The virtual training by far on the back end is a lot harder for the trainers to pull off. You got to get all that energy across a screen, which you can't always necessarily do. But I would tell you that the feedback from the people who don't normally get to attend this kind of training has been absolutely phenomenal. They're so thrilled to be able to connect directly with an FDA standardization officer, with FDA, with USDA, with subject matter experts directly without the interference of their bosses playing interference there. They love to be able to make those connections, ask the questions. We've really been able to get them back to the basics of remembering, just going back to the risk, what are the risk factors and how do we inspect for those? But it is definitely difficult. I think for the future, it would be phenomenal to come up with a hybrid approach of classroom for the people who can attend, have the money to attend, have the time to attend, and then be able to virtually have people sitting in virtually who can also attend from a virtual level. Maybe they don't get the full experience of the classroom that way, but I think a nice hybrid approach would be phenomenal. But don't underestimate, those of you guys who are with FDA, don't underestimate your being there and present on those trainings. The people who are on those trainings love seeing you, both FDA and USDA and all the federal agencies for that matter, because they don't normally get to talk with you directly. And we really do appreciate all of you being on those. And so I just wanted to give a kudos to all the FDAers out there for taking the time to be a part of those, because it's very, very much appreciated.
Thank you, Melissa. Those words.
Yes, thank you.
And
you always do a good job with your training, Melissa. So thank you for the kudos.
Thank you back.
Yeah. Here's one in the chat, and I think this is going to be more appropriate for everybody in the central, these 16 states. What are your thoughts on cottage food being shipped over interstate lines, or even delivered over lines? What happens with the outbreaks related to these items that are multi-state because of shipping aspect? So, I mean, when it comes from FDA cottage food, I mean, it's every state has something different, but this takes it to the next level of shipping it across state lines. And I think it's maybe appropriate to have some of the state and locals chime in on this one here. anybody
Yeah, I
wants,
don't want to call anybody out, but I know some states are dealing with some cottage food. So if y'all don't want to talk, you can put it in the chat. I won't call your names, I promise.
oh, Mike has his hand up. Mike, unmute yourself.
I'd have to check the law, but I believe it's actually addressed in the law that they're not allowed to sell them outside of the state of North Dakota.
So that's a cottage law for that's how North Dakota's cottage law is set up, right, Mike?
I believe so.
And, you know, Minnesota, is that similar to what you guys are doing? Shipping across state lines? I know you have some restrictions on it.
And then I know Maryland commented they don't allow it shipping out of state, and neither does Delaware.
All right, there's Kim.
Minnesota's law also does not allow it to be sold out of state. Doesn't matter. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but that's what the law says.
Yeah.
It gets really tough with North Dakota, Minnesota because of our shared communities like Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, or Fargo Moorhead, where they're literally, you know, separated by that, you know, just that border. You know, it's right there. You have a farmer's market, you know, right across the river, and, you know, everyone's having a great time selling their products. But, you know, I live 4 blocks across the border and I can't bring my baked goods over, you know, so I know there's struggles with those type of interactions.
Yeah, Michigan's law says it has to be face to face. Indiana the same way, no state lines. So maybe some of this cottage food maybe really is just internet sales, right? Maybe they're not really cottage, they're just selling over Facebook or something. What would be the likelihood of an outbreak that happens with cottage food with foods other than possibly noro? I guess it would really depend on the food, right? I mean, I remember pheasants coming from South Dakota that were vacuum packaged with CBOT years ago. And I just had a followed up on a question on cottage food. I'm kind of diverting here. I think it gets really confusing too with cottage laws where, you know, some are allowed to do some canning or acidification, others aren't. And I did learn this, that if you're going to do low acid canned food in your retail establishment, and you're going to use it for sales out of your store or even in your own inventory, you do have to register with FDA and have a filed process for low acid canned foods. Boom. Acidified might be a little different depending. Oh, on pheasants, Maryland do not consider that a cottage food. What would you consider it, Maryland? Wild game, which was a question in the very beginning of the chat. North Dakota Mike was asking about how are different states handling wild game. And I think what he was getting to is not domesticated wild game, like maybe a pheasant's from a pheasant farm or rabbits from a rabbit farm, but what about wild harvested game? Do you allow that in your states or local jurisdictions? Did I hit it right, Mike Lee?
Yeah, you did. I was standardizing someone last week and they were curious about the distinction on the marking instructions between game animals approved by the regulatory authority and wild game animals cooked for, you know, immediate service or whatever the language is there. And so we were talking about it. So North Dakota doesn't have inspection programs for wild game, and I was curious if other states did. And if they did, what animals were they allowing then under those programs to be served in their facilities as approved source?
I know Lisa Harrison had her hand up and was also wanting to speak. Lisa, did you want to ask your question or make your comment? No, you've been waiting patiently.
There, I am unmuted. Okay. So yeah, I'm the one that initiated that first question, and then that made me think about that. Yes, right now in Indiana, you cannot do over the state lines. That is what it is. However, a bill that passed last year made it to where we had to have a work group with we call them home-based vendors, not cottage, but that the work group had to be formed with the home-based vendor interest and regulatory interest. And a lot of the things that keep coming up is they want to expand to over state line shipping. And right now we're saying no. It looks like most states say no as well. But the issue that I wanted to know the answer to was if a home-based vendor or cottage food was to be allowed or did go over state lines and a multi-state outbreak was a result of it, would FDA be involved in the investigation, and what would that look like in relation to getting that food recalled?
Well, I can answer just from when I was an investigator how multi-state outbreaks happened. I know things have evolved, but if you're talking specifically with a cottage food type operation, well, first of all, it's multi-state. The state that picked it up would alert everybody they have an outbreak. FDA emergency response would be involved. FDA's initial reaction is going to be like, okay, what was the product? Because if it's distributed nationally, how big of an impact is this going to have? Will this outbreak happen? So we want to stop the distribution going forward of that product once it's identified. If it's coming from a cottage food thing, then I think it's going to rely back to the state that has that industry where it originated from. And things can change with FDA. Would we help? Maybe we might be supportive in lab analysis, depending what it is, or depending what the capabilities of the state are. But the first thing on an outbreak that comes to mind to FDA is, what's the product? What was the source of the outbreak? Is it a commercial product? And if so, how far has it been distributed and where has it been distributed? And how do we get a handle on that? Does that help, Lisa?
Yes, thank you.
Margaret has her hand up. Go ahead, Margaret. Hey, I wanted to, as we're waiting for Margaret, I wanted to bring one thing up because this session is going to close out this banter session. We're going to move into this other exciting session, which is kind of like this one, questions and answers on the food code. But so here we are in virtual mode. Before this happened, we had Detroit set up for an in-person retail food seminar. And then after that, we had Pennsylvania. And then after that, Illinois was up for the batting order. So the question that comes up, and maybe John, you can ask that question. What do you guys see in the future of, and how do you want to see this rotated when we go back in person?
You're speaking to this, John?
Yes, John, T-I-M.
Okay. No problem.
There's probably like 13% of the 400 are Johns on here, huh?
Yes, I know.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I could tell you, I'm getting an echo, so maybe I need to mute somewhere. Okay.
You're back muted.
Okay. I'll just try not to hear myself talk. That's okay. So basically, I just know when I was just really starting out with FDA, was kind of thrown into a situation where, at least amongst the central region, it was kind of hard to get a rotation going, or at least know who the next state up would be. And and God bless Michigan, because they stepped up to bat very, very quickly. And it was barely 2 weeks after I had known some people get on a call and graciously volunteered. And it's a very high effort type of deal, which I think, at least in my opinion, having some sort of rotation might have helped alleviate, setting up a batting order to where people know what to expect going forward. Albeit it's really tough to see how it's going to play out with the ongoing state of the world, So that's my 2 cents. What does everyone else think?
All right, well, I guess we're going to have to make a decision on our batting order for the Central, which is inclusive of 15 states plus DC. So I always say 16 was, we would, someone from the East, someone from the West, and someone from the Central alignment would just volunteer. We do have everything set up, at least preliminary, for the next 3 years, but other jurisdictions rotate. Every state in that old geographical region had to take a turn regardless, So something to think about in the future, don't have to decide today. We've had good success in finding volunteers. Sometimes we'd like to find them sooner than later, but just something to think about, folks in the Central, how we move forward once we get past the pandemic, if we do, which we will. We're going to move into the next session here. There's so many comments in chat, it's hard to keep up with them, but I do want to encourage you that if your question wasn't answered and we ran out of coffee for this bantering session, please contact your retail food specialist and you can ask these questions directly to them. Okay, and we'll make sure we get them answered. So, okay, our last in-person retail food seminar was held back in 2019. That was in DC. And then in 2020, we tagged along with National NEHA as a regional seminar. So this year we have our own stage and we're doing it virtually. So thank you to AFDO for hosting this platform and making it happen. Randy, Crystal, Amy, those people I've been working with. Okay, food code interpretation session is a very popular session in the Central region, and I'm not sure why. I mean, for us, retail food specialists, we're on stage. I mean, almost standing, it feels like naked because we don't know what's going to go on. And I also think there's people in the audience too that really enjoy trying to stump us with questions. So anyway, a little bit of history.
They get a kick out of it. I'm just kidding.
What?
That they get a kick out of stumping us.
Yeah, some people like to do that. And it's challenging for us too. But we started this own self-inflicted pain back in 1999, 22 years ago. And it's been a staple ever since. So not to disappoint in this virtual format, we're offering food code interpretations and questions. So this session's meant to be interactive, kind of like we've been doing. Chat or raise your hand provides opportunity to ask questions concerning food code provisions, inspectional techniques, report marking, and of course, standardization. So we'll just keep going with the chat and hand raising feature. I don't think we need ground rules. We usually have ground rules for this, but I think you all know them, right? Be open to hearing other people's perspective, no interruption while individual speaking. Well, we got that control virtually. Thanks, Randy. And it's okay to disagree. We just have to respect each other. And there's one rule we always have that I say can't do. And I say, there's no smoking during these sessions, but since we're virtual, go ahead, light it up, and you can smoke now that you're at your own home. So we're gonna take that ground rule out of the equation. So here we go. I think you heard Kim Destrump identify the retail food specialist, but who we have online is you have Kenya Moon, DC, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, John Tran, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Carolyn White over there in green, she has Illinois and Indiana. Mike Nordos, he's not a Packer fan, but by gosh, he's got Wisconsin. And Becky Steiner was gonna pop in, but she's kind of filling in for Kentucky. I'm not sure if she's on. You got myself, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota. Used to have Wyoming, but I got rid of that here in July 1st. And not present as part of the Central Specialist is Valerie Potopsing. She's got New Jersey, and Tom Nerney, he's got Pennsylvania. All right, so go ahead and throw us a Rotten tomato, a vegetable, throw us a question. If not, I do have some preloaded questions that people have sent in for your amusement and are answering. So is there any questions right off the bat? Anybody? Well, I'll hit
Nothing in chat so far.
nothing. Okay, well, I'll start out with one. Why is leftover food required to be reheated to 165 Fahrenheit for hot holding? What hazard does it control? So this question, basically reheating is covered under section 3, 40311, right? All food has to be reheated for hot holding at 165 for 15 seconds. And that process cannot happen. It has to happen within 2 hours, right? And why is that? Because if there's any bacteria in the food, if it got reintroduced after cooking, through some kind of contaminated equipment or bad practice, and that cooling process was delayed and took a long time, those pathogens could regrow. And if you don't, and reheating is going to eliminate those vegetative cells. But we also got to be concerned about spore formers, right? So we know spore forming bacteria like Clostridium perfringens. I mean, when it gets cooked conventionally, it'll go into spore mode. Oh my gosh, it's too hot. I got to protect myself. And then if there's temperature abuse during cooling, they can regerminate and grow vegetative cells. And then recooking is going to destroy those vegetative cells. But reheating does not cure everything, right? What about those bacteria that produce toxins, right? All a toxin is a medical or a metabolical waste product of a bacteria from growing, right? That's what they ooze out. And so some of these toxins are heat stable, so you cannot destroy them, especially staph enterotoxin. So reheating is not going to get rid of enterotoxin from Staph aureus. So reheating has its benefit. I kind of like to call it a insurance policy, right? Versus an exact, strict, critical control point, because it doesn't control necessarily everything. So getting back to the question, what hazard does it control? It controls spore formers, and it controls those bacteria that may have been reintroduced into the food after it was cooked. And all the vegetative spoilage organisms in that food after it's been cooked, now there's no competitive organisms for pathogens. So now they have a free playground to grow even faster and more efficient. So, which kind of goes to the next question. Let me ask you this question for you guys. So reheating to 165 for 15 seconds. What if I have a 10-pound bag of ready-to-eat hot dogs and the wind is blowing from the west at 7 miles per hour? I remove 3 pounds of the hot dogs. I want to reheat for hot holding. What temperature must that be at? Anybody? 135, right. Now that I've opened that bag, the bag's exposed. I took 3 pounds out. I have 7 pounds left. I take 3 more pounds out on today, Wednesday, and I want to reheat them. What temperature do I have to reheat them to? That's 3 pounds I took out. And this time the wind's only going 4 miles per hour from the northwest. 165, no, the correct answer is 135 still. So when you have a ready-to-eat commercially prepared bag, if you take 3 pounds out and reheat them fine, and that bag is kept closed, you can still go back in there and go 35. Now let's go back to, I have 3 pounds of hot-held hot dogs. They reached 135. I'm taking 2 pounds back because they never sold today, and I'm going to cool them. And the next day I'm going to reheat them. What would that temperature be? 165, correct. Okay. Okay, starting to get some questions up there. I think I saw one that says about pasteurized eggs in there. Question was food code answers, not true. Ghost kitchens, that's scary.
Yeah,
We
here's
did
one
see one
from
on
the chat
pasteurized
that
eggs,
says,
and I just, I dropped one of our FDA fact sheets on that discusses pasteurized eggs, so.
Okay.
Once pasteurized, a pasteurized egg is a non-TCS food, so.
Yep. So does that have to be refrigerated, Mike?
No temperature control for that.
It doesn't?
Cold, hard-boiled egg.
Oh, that was
As long
cold,
as it's
hard boiled.
intact in the shell. Yeah, according, like I said, I posted the link the information we have, and as long as the shell is intact, it's considered non-TCF. Temperature control not required.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see the whole question. All right, what else is coming up, throwing at us? Here's
we
another.
got one about two compartment sinks. I don't know if you see that one. It says, why is there an option for two compartment sanitization when there doesn't appear to be any products that meet this requirement?
Why is that? Well, that's it's an option, right? So basically, if I'm going to operate a kitchen, part of my plan review, part of the requirements of the food code is that you got a 3 comp sink it. Even if you have a mechanical warewashing sink in case that thing fails. So now what about a 2 comp sink? That's kind of like an escape clause that is given to the regulatory authority to say, hey, you know what? All I got is 1 cutting board and 1 knife, and all I do is slice oranges and some beef sticks. Why do I need a 3 comp sink? So that might be an option where they could get by, if it's approved by the regulatory jurisdiction to allow a 2 comp sink. It's going to be based on operation, amount of equipment, and type of equipment. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I think if you're going to be doing, if you have dishes and utensils, I mean, you can't get by with a 2 comp sink. And this is for a limited amount of utensils and equipment. Does that answer that question? Whoever asked the 2 compartment sink question. Here's one that kind of piggyback off of that reheating one. If food that is reheated for hot holding requires control for a hazard, isn't that hazard present in the food that is heated to any temperature or served cold for immediate service? Besides proper cooling, how is this potential hazard addressed at all? Going back to what I said before, reheating is really more, I like to call it more of a safety precaution, right? Because if you properly cook something, you're going to eliminate the hazard, except for the spores. If you properly cool something, you're going to prevent any reintroduction of those pathogens or the spore formers from regerminating and proliferating. So proper cooking, proper cooling, you're going to be fine. And if you think about it, then really 165 is really not a critical control point if you can nail down the first 2 food safety boundaries. But to understand this concept, you really have to understand and be thinking HACCP minded, right? It's a food safety leap to think how reheating follows the food flow. So, and this holds true because if Greg takes a beef roast, I cook it, and I properly cool it, the next day I can slice off roast beef and make a sandwich out of it, right? So my hazards in this scenario are controlled by proper cooking and proper cooling. And reheating is not an issue. We bring reheating into the formula of the food flow because it's going to go through the danger zone. So we're concerned about that food not staying in the danger zone for more than 2 hours. So we put a limit on it. And also it gives us that insurance if it was temperature abused previously in the flow, boom, we took care of vegetative cells, except for Staph aureus. And you think about, well, the cooling parameters in the food code, they're really, really, really super aggressive. 6 hours, my gosh, that's really fast. But because Clostridium perfringens needs about 15 hours of temperature abuse to grow to such large numbers to get someone sick. But that's what USDA says, and they're correct. But on their study, that piece of meat is in a bag, vacuum, or in a closed container. So cooling is happening for 15 hours, but there's no reintroduction of other pathogens in there. So that's why that works. Staph aureus needs like 10 to the 6th numbers of bacteria, and that's a lot in order to produce enough toxin to get someone to vomit and puke. And in food manufacturing, sometimes they would use, in the old days, they would take samples from production lines to see how much Staph aureus at what levels they were at. So they knew how to better put controls in on food production. So I'm not saying reheating is not important, but I'm saying if you look at it from a HACCP perspective in theology, there's other controls in place that control those hazards before you get to the reheating step. Other specialists or anybody, you guys see anything in the chat?
Hey, Greg, yeah, we got a lot coming in on chat that we can get to. I wanted to comment real quick on that, back to that 2 compartment one.
Yeah.
I was trying to look up products and stuff because the question was pertinent to products. So there are situations where, we have a detergent sanitizer product where you can skip a rinse step. So I just wanted to make sure we're clear about that, being as I just answered this question for Wisconsin about a month ago and gave them the answer that you can do it. So there is products out there that are detergent sanitizers combos. And it's 4/501.115 that allows use of something like that. So I thought maybe the question was that those products aren't widely available. And I don't know how available they aren't, but I know they are still out there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I glossed right over the second part of the requirement for the 2 comp sink. The detergent sanitizer, that product has to be used and has to be used in both. Yeah. So very good. From a pathable chat, does 6-20214 require variance for places that have no doors to enter the restroom? In other words, are you just walking through an open versus an actual door? Oh, gosh. Specialists out there in the FDA world, I see these all over, especially in like gas station convenience stores. I'm okay with them. I mean, really, they're not sitting right outside the production of a kitchen. They're kind of in the grocery store aisle back in the corner of the store, and you have to go through a little maze to get back in there, and there's no doors. It's not opening right into the kitchen. What do you guys think?
I think I have to look up the actual wording of the actual code because it makes sense, but the question is, does it require a variance? If it doesn't meet requirements of the code, then it would require a variance. So off the top of my head is technically, yes, it would require a variance, but I'd have no problem approving a situation like Greg just described, where there's a clear barrier, where there's separation. It might even be a better situation where, you go through the little maze to get in the bathroom, while everyone coming out of the bathroom isn't touching the door and everything then. So
isn't part of that building code though too? I mean, that's kind of outside. I mean, it's still the establishment, but public restrooms isn't covered in building code. I mean, we're kind of concerned about employee restrooms, right? And how those are, where they're located. Not, public's important too, especially if the food employees use those public restrooms.
I'll read what the code provision says. I don't know if anybody's pulled it up yet, but it just says basically pretty much what Mike summarized, except where a toilet room is located outside of a food establishment and does not open directly into the food establishment, such as a toilet room that is provided by the management of a shopping mall. A toilet room located on the premises shall be completely enclosed and provided with a tight fitting and self-closing door. kind of to what Mike was saying. If it doesn't fit what's required in the code, you would possibly need a variance, but my opinion, I don't see an issue approving that variance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good. Here's one. I do want to take this loaded, this question that came in pre-session, because I think it's a good question, and I think it's a timely question, and I think we've been hearing about, working smarter, changing inspections, active manager control, preventive controls. We've been hearing all sorts of things. So this question comes up: what parameters are best used to determine active managerial control is being achieved? That's a very, very fair question. We talk about active managerial control, and it's the best thing, right? But how do you know it's being achieved? So, in fact, I love this question, whoever asked it. I like how you think, thinking forward. So, Kenya, give them a gold star or a bonus.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I love the AMC thinking. I love it.
Yeah, it's good. We're thinking beyond just marking a checklist. So what is active manager control really? It's basically when a food service operation takes a proactive role in ensuring control of a risk factor, right? So how do we assess that? So the first thing you need to do to assess that is we have to figure out, is that risk factor in or out of control? If it's in control, why is it in control? Is it just dumb luck? Or was there a purposeful act by management to make sure it was in control? So when it comes down to assessing active manager control, it comes down to a combination of observations and questions to the operator or food employees. In order to give us an idea how strong the establishment's active managerial control is over a risk factor, we can, as humans, put a quantitative measurement to it. And FDA does do this in our risk factor study. We go out there and we kind of quantify the level of active managerial control. You can find that in the instructions manual on how to do a risk-based inspection under Standard 9. But that's how we quantify it, do it quantifiable. So we're saying active managerial control is a proactive, purposeful activity. We're going to assess if active managerial control is really, it becomes an evaluation of the establishment's procedures, their training, and their monitoring activities they use to control a given risk factor. Let me give you an example, see if I can bring this home with what I mean. And we've all seen this. You walk into the kitchen, you have your hairnet on. You are observing the cooking of chicken in a fryer. The fryer is overstuffed with chicken. In fact, you see chicken outside the oil. Some pieces are not even submerged in the oil. So our observation also saw the overstuffed basket of chicken in the fryer, but our other observation was to take a finished cook temperature. And we got 119, 126, 198. So we have a risk factor control step that is what? Out of control, right? So next we need to ask some questions. And we don't want to ask closed-ended questions, but we want to ask open-ended questions, right? An open-ended question would be like, how do you cook your chicken? Right? A closed-ended, okay. And the operator says, well, we load up the basket, we set the timer, it buzzes, and it's done. That's the procedure. So that's an open-ended question. You're trying to get an explanation. So a closed-ended question would be like, do you have a thermometer? Or what do you cook your chicken to? Do you cook it to 165? Of course, they're going to say, yes, we cook it to 165. And yes, we have a thermometer. It's in the manager's office because we keep losing it. Okay, right? So asking open-ended questions helps with the activity of assessing active managerial control. So how do you ask the employee, how do you know if, when the chicken's done? Well, the timer lets us know. How were you trained? By my shift lead here. He told me how to do it, or she. Okay, so in this scenario I just laid out, do you think there's active managerial control over that risk factor? We've observed chicken not being properly cooked because it's overstuffed.
I see a couple no's in the chat.
No, Okay, so now we walk into the walk-in cooler. And we see soup that looks like it's cooling because it's in a container, and the container's in an ice bath. There's a ladle in the soup. There's some masking tape over the container. And there's evidence that someone's writing down some temperatures and times on that tape. And we notice that the volume of soup in that ice bath is very small compared to the typical 5 gallons we see in pails. So next we have to ask some questions. First, we have our observation. We have to affirm that indeed what we are observing is actually a cooling process. So we talked to the chef and bingo, yep, he said they're cooling soup. And they're in the process of doing that. So we have to ask some questions. So looks like we have something that's in control, a risk factor. We affirm that they are indeed cooling, just like on the other example, we affirm they were finished cooking. So Chef Mike, why do you keep a ladle in the soup? Well, Inspector Greg, if we don't agitate that soup, it's not gonna cool fast enough. All right. Well, how did you discover that, Chef Mike? Well, by monitoring our cooling activities. Oh, so what is your goal to cool food? Well, we want to get it down to 6 hours. And then once we get it down to below 40 within 6 hours or faster, we bulk it up and store it. Well, what if you don't reach your goal in 6 hours? Well, then we just destroy it or we reheat it. Well, how much soup do you destroy, Chef Mike? Nothing. Well, you know, and why is that? Because we monitor the cooling of it and we speed things up and agitate it. So where did you learn that, Mike? Well, from you guys, the last time you were doing the inspection. So basically, do you think this establishment or this observation has active manager control over that risk factor? They have a procedure, ice bath. They have training. Obviously, their staff is trained to do that, and they monitor the cooling. They're writing it down on a record, even though it's a piece of tape, right? So they've learned that food does not cool by magic. So that's kind of an example how I use to assess active manager control of a risk factor. I make my observations, I determine if it's in or out of compliance, and if it's in compliance, why is it in compliance? And what procedures do they have in place as an establishment for procedures, training, and monitoring? So try that in your next inspection. Try looking at a risk factor and doing a little self-assessment of an active manager control. Okay.
Nice. So Greg, we got a lot of questions in chat.
Oh boy.
And we got, which I'll warn you guys.
Oh, hey, Kenya, I think you guys.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry, I think you unmuted me, but going back to the restroom question, we're just trying to get an interpretation from FDA as to what toilet room actually is. Is it the room that encloses the toilet or the room around the
Ooh, that's a good one, Courtney.
Yeah.
That is
and if you want an official interpretation in writing, I would suggest let's go through CIFSAN to get that, Courtney. But I see where you're going with it. So we can touch base offline. I'll let Greg address it here as well. But if you want something officially in writing, we may have to submit it to CIFSAN. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
No, I think, yeah, we'll have to get an interpretation on what a toilet room is. I mean,
because I don't know if it's defined in the I don't think it's defined in the code. Yeah,
it's not.
Yeah, that goes back to 1976. Yeah, but yeah. Well, is that something Courtney could just write to you, Kenya? I mean, just to get it started.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, you can send it to me, and then I'm still technically on detail, but John and I will get it up to the appropriate folks to get the answers. Hopefully that helps. Sorry, Courtney. I don't know if you wanted something right now, but
Yeah, and just to clarify, in reheating a roast beef, you don't have to go to 165. You can reuse the roast cooking parameters for reheating a chunk of roast.
I think the question was on, does USDA have different guidance on that? I thought we were aligning, because that's the way I read that question, is that USDA wasn't following 340111B.
On the reheating or on
Yeah,
what?
I thought we were in sync now on reheating those
On
roasts.
what, Mike?
I must have bad internet connection. I thought the question was referring to, when I read it, it says USDA cooked prime rib is not cooked according to 340111B. I'm not familiar with what USDA has put out there. I thought we harmonized all our temperatures.
Well, we do on some things, but it depends on, we don't know, we'd have to know all the parameters, right? So we're talking conventional cooking in an oven. I mean, when you nail down a HACCP plan or a food flow in manufacturing, there's other parameters, like is it cooked in a bag? Is it cooked in the open? I mean, so you look at what hazards are being introduced, what hazards are likely to be introduced. So, going back to cooling, USDA will say cooling for chunks of meat has to be cooled within 15, 16 hours. But that's to control Clostridium perfringens. But the key element here is that food is actually cooked in a bag type system where no other possible pathogens can be reintroduced. The only thing left on that chunk of meat is Clostridium perfringens. And they know scientifically, if I can get it down within 16 hours, we're good. But, the food code doesn't say that. Food code is not as prescriptive to the food flow in that example. So, but I think we do, Mike, like you said, I think our roast temperatures should be the same. The final cook temperatures, we moved chicken to 165 to our hamburgers 155 to 17 seconds versus 15 seconds. But I guess, with the large group of like 400 participants, and I'm sure there's so much in the chat that I can't even keep up, is that you can ask these questions to your retail food specialist. Find out what state you're from, and find out what state your specialist from. You could ask them directly, and we can, as retail food specialists, we can all look at them and help each other out too.
There's a good one on mollusk and shellfish in there as well.
What's that one, Mike? We have a few minutes.
Talking about ice as a contamination source. So I'll summarize. It just talks about how we're required to have separation of lots for mollusk and shellfish until it's sold, but a lot of places keep them on ice. So can the ice act as a contaminant between different lots of shellfish? So whereas they should be separated with a permanent barrier of some type, so the ice can't transmit contaminants from one lot to the next.
That's a good question, but I guess if the ice is maintained frozen and not an ice slurry, it seems like it might be the risk is minimized versus if it's sloped and it's melting, you got a pool of ice water at the bottom, then you might have a concern, right? But let's take it back to shellfish and water, and you have different lots mixed. Didn't that interpretation come up too? At least if you kept the shell stock in the same harvest area, it could be in the same water. I have to look at that interpretation years ago. That might relate to the ice as well. Anybody else know the question of that, or the answer to that question?
Yeah, I know when we worked with this in the Southwest region, when I was still working with Texas, the shellfish specialist there said definitely. So that's who we reached out to, is that ice can, as it melts, contaminate, just like we wouldn't want, a ready-to-eat food such as, tuna or something's going to be used for sushi below and the ice melting into it. The shell stock could contaminate one another. I don't know if we've officially addressed it as far as rules on separation of ice or not, or barriers. So I've never gone as far to enforce that, but according to shellfish, the possibility for cross contamination is there if the ice is melting.
Well, what are they cross contaminating?
Lots, one lot of shellfish to the next, right?
I thought it's more or less, I mean, but if you think about it, it's harvest area. And the reason we keep lots separated is for traceability. So if it's harvested from a boom approved source and boom approved source, and they're raw animal foods, I mean, and they cross contaminate through ice, you know, the reason we do tracking is for outbreaks, so we know where the lot came from, not so much of a microbiological hazard because they're already raw products. We'll have to dive into this one more.
Yeah, we'll have to, it'd be good to get one of our shellfish specialists to help answer.
Yeah, so it's 5 minutes too. So we're done with this session, but you know what? I don't know. I think it worked out okay. Doing it virtual, I hope.
There's a lot going on in chat. And I know we did get to a lot of your questions. We apologize. But like I say, like Greg said, reach out to your specialist. Greg, anything else you want to comment on?
No.
And I think we saved some of the questions too, so we'll try to reach out to you all.
Yeah, and I guess it is difficult to actually read and talk at the same time, at least for me. But if you feel unsatisfied, your question never got addressed, please text us, email us, your specialists the questions, and we'll definitely answer them.
Yes.
All right.
Definitely. And I think, and kudos to Carolyn and John working behind the scenes, responding to some of the questions we didn't get to. I think they answered those too. So awesome.
Good.
Thank you guys for that. Yeah.
They were typing, they were chatting, they were typing in chat.
Yes, they were typing.
Yeah, that's what I was just pointing out. Celeste agreed she remembered the same thing that I recalled with, she had the same shellfish. So what we need to do is talk to all the shellfish and see if we can get answers on that. So I'm glad she remembered the same thing as me, because I was thinking I was crazy for a second. So
yeah, well,
cool. Yeah.
All right.
So I guess we can officially get ready to close out. I